My name's Josh Harding. I'm a second year postgrad medical student, and I was quite surprised to get the invite to come and talk to you today, but I'm happy to be here. And I think it came off the back of a 4-part article series that I wrote some years ago now on how iPads will revolutionise medical education. First of all, I'd just like to say, obviously, I'm not an expert in anything that you guys do, and I don't admit to be one. So I'm not aiming to educate at all during this presentation, but possibly illuminate and perhaps incite some provocation and debate amongst you. And I'll leave you to discuss the semantics and the points that I raise later, and hopefully you'll find them interesting. So I'm just going to set the scene with regards to how I use information, what kind of student I am, because that's obviously going to be quite important to you. I'm going to talk a little bit about tablet computing, and then how I consult information, what workflows I use, and barriers and challenges I face, and then perhaps look at an ideal future. So I started my higher education at Newcastle University, where I studied physiology. My primary source of information here were lecture notes printed just like that, and annotated notes. We would then go home or to the library and write more notes, which are again just analogue and paper, and this probably represents the majority of the educations that you have all had, and they are more or less analogue. I did keep all of my notes and textbooks from my first degree, and so this picture represents the sum total of my education from Newcastle University. It's a good thing I can remember absolutely everything in there, because it would be very difficult for me to find any of it now. So when I started my postgraduate medical training at Warwick Medical School, I found medicine to be a very, very different in terms of experience, in terms of consuming information. I'm more than 2 years into my course, and in that time period I have easily covered the content that I did in the 3 years at Newcastle. It was obvious from the beginning that I'd need to consult a lot of information in medicine very quickly and very efficiently. And textbooks obviously have all the answers, but is it really practical to carry them between all my seminars, my group works? It's definitely not, but it is necessary, and we will always try. So did I find a solution to this problem early on? I did, and it was digital consumption. I bought the first iPad when it was released, and found it to be the potential to the solution to all my problems, and recognised that it could revolutionise how students access information. I adopted it early, and 3 years on, I am now completely paperless. So my primary source of information for medicine is now my iPad, and I have got everything on my iPad that I need to study medicine. I don't need anything else other than the internet, perhaps. So my lectures now look like this, or like this. My notebooks look like this, or this. And my notes look like this. I prefer to take notes using a pen, because you actually learn better when you write things down rather than typing. And this is not a mock-up that I've done specially for you. They are my notes in a class, exactly how I would normally take them. And it's no slower than taking notes with a pen and paper. And my textbook library now looks something like that. So using this iPad, using this device, I'm able to search across all my content and resources that I use, seamlessly switch between note-taking and any of the resources that I choose to have. And in essence, I'm able to utilise all of the information I need in a fraction of the time that it would take to root through my handwritten notes from Newcastle. I think this is completely essential for a student of the future, and I think that students will come to expect it, especially when you consider that the current generation of students are growing up in an on-demand society where everything is available when you want it, where you want it, and how you want it. So with this peek into my history and present as a student, I hope you can see that the role of information in my life is quite domain specific, and so obviously my experiences and viewpoints will be based on that, so just bear that in mind as we go through. So a little bit about tablet computing. In the last sort of 3 years, they've advanced massively and captured the imagination of educators all over the world. It's not a new idea. Until the iPad was released, it had pretty much failed. And the iPad has since sort of carved a niche into education as a portable and always connected device. It's a powerful, personalised education tool, and I feel that it will be adopted as a norm by students within the next sort of 18 months, if not sooner. And as this happens, students will at minimum expect access to their most used resources digitally, as well as new and exciting enhanced education resources. So I suppose the big question for all of you is, and the most pertinent question is that, are you ready to meet this inevitable demand? So why would you suggest a student uses a tablet and digital consumption of information? Well, research has shown that we remember 20% of what we read, 30% of what we hear, 40% of what we see, 50% of what we say, 60% of what we do, and ultimately we remember 90% of what we read, see, hear, say, and do. And so an adoption of a device that allows you to do all of these things is pretty much a no-brainer. It's a personalised education experience, and we all have different learning styles which focus on different aspects of learning. Most of us have a visual preference, but however you learn, your tablet or iPad will be flexible to your needs, and you can set it up in such a way to best reflect your learning style. Students generally, I find, do want to use tablets and digital content, and I'm yet to find a student who has observed me using an iPad and not want to buy one afterwards. And I always ask them the same question, so why haven't you bought one? And I generally get the answer, I've always wanted to buy one, but I've never been sure how I could actually use it. And this brings up a key point of awareness amongst students, and I'll touch on that later on. So how do I consult information? Well, I felt that giving you a direct insight into a sort of normal day for me as a student would be the best way to display my common workflows, how, when and where I access information. So my current clinical rotation is orthopaedics and anaesthetics, and an average day for me would involve what's on the screen there. I would meet with my consultant for a pre-op ward round, where before they arrive, generally I would sort of queue up the information that I would need to tackle any potential situation, so I've got all the information I need at my fingertips. When they arrive, generally we'll be asked to take a history from a patient. I do that using my iPad. I'm yet to see another medical student actually use it to take histories from an iPad, but it works very well and it's just as good as using a pen and paper. We're also commonly quizzed on all sorts of things that we don't know the answers to on a regular basis, and so having the answers or having some notes to look at allows you to answer your questions with more confidence. Also, we're commonly asked to do things, examinations, procedures that we haven't seen in or done or been taught about in quite a long time, and so having the ability to look at your notes on that topic, refresh your memory, then perform an examination with confidence thank the patient and leave is really, really useful, because then once you've done that, you can immediately check what you've just done against your notes and essentially give yourself an instant feedback. After this, generally, we will head down to day surgery, and because I'm doing anaesthetics, it's quite common that I'll come across drugs that I've never seen before. So I can use resource apps such as the BNF, which is just a drug codex of all the drugs that we use. Look it up, instantly learn about it, and then subsequently ask my anaesthetist about the drug and get reinforcement. On this particular day, I was asked if I'd like to scrub in on a radical neck dissection, and I jumped at the chance before realising that I had not looked at my head and neck anatomy in about 6 months. And so immediately I can use resource apps again, such as this anatomy app, to recap the area in which I'm going to be looking at. And this gives me, brings all this information to the forefront of my mind again, gives me anchor points on which I can then hang new knowledge that's inevitably going to be taught to me, and overall improve my learning and increase the retention. And it really does help, because I've been in situations where I've not been able to do this, and you barely remember anything afterwards. Once a week we have academic teaching in a lecture theatre, and so I generally arrive, sit down, and I can load the slides from the internet, export them into my note-taking app, and then I'm able to annotate the lectures and record the speaker if I wish. So essentially I can't really miss anything. During the lecture I can consult all sorts of resources, textbooks, resource apps, my old notes, the internet if required, and the end result is essentially a near complete set of notes, whereas my colleagues will head off to the library afterwards, get their textbooks and fill in gaps, and I don't need to do that. I've saved myself a lot of time because I've already finished. So in terms of textbooks and what I use, I currently use Inkling heavily. Inkling is the only format that I know of in the UK that offers interactive ebooks. So these newer forms of ebooks may also be known as, you may know them, smart books or multi-touch books. I strongly believe that these are the foundation in which future textbooks should be built upon. I hope that the majority of you have used one before, or at least know about them, because I'm always wowing my colleagues when they look at the content that I'm looking at compared to their paper copies. I won't go through the full list of what they're capable of, but you expect essentially multimedia content in it, and they have the opportunity to buy your chapters rather than the entire textbook, which to a student is very useful. Although I do believe that we may be witnessing the death of the paper textbook, I still don't think that publishers have even scratched the surface regarding utilising the full potential of interactive ebooks, and so the nails are not quite in the coffin yet. Despite being able to carry your entire library with you in something that's essentially the same size and weight as a paper notebook, which, by the way, I think is a reason enough to justify buying a tablet and using it on a daily basis, I still think that publishers need to add a little bit more of a USP to their products to push students into definitively going paperless. So I think that this USP really is learning analytics. And if you adopt interactive textbooks as a base model, I think you'll find quite quickly that smart textbooks will become irresistible, because essentially they will give you a better grade. So in case you're getting a little bit lost with the terminology, I'm using interactive textbooks to describe a textbook that has multimedia content, and a smart textbook to describe a textbook that has the added benefit of adaptation based on learning analytics. So what do I want my textbook to do in the future? Because I've been using interactive textbooks now since Inkling came out, and they're a bit of old hat to me now, to be honest. They're great, but I think that they need to be enhanced. What I'd like is my textbook to study me while I study it. And I want it to tell me how I'm doing, congratulate me on my strengths, remind me about the weaknesses that I know that I have, remind me about the weaknesses that I don't know I have, and then adapt the content of the book to suit what I need to learn. I think that it would be feasible to do this by collecting data on things like how long you've been reading chapters for, which chapters you're missing out, what questions you're getting correct and what you're getting wrong. And then obviously if you've got all this large amount of data, it wouldn't be a stretch to plot it on a centile chart and then allow yourself to compare, students to compare themselves to other students, which would be really invaluable. It would also be nice if it acted as a personal study buddy and reminded me to recover content after I've learnt it. So I know, for instance, that if I look at something to maximise retention, I will then have to reread it within a couple of days, then within 7 days after that, and then a month. And if my textbook could tell me that I'm about to forget something because I haven't looked it up again since, I think that you would see significant rises in retention of knowledge when you're learning. All of this might seem a little bit ambitious, and perhaps it is, but 4 or 5 years' time, maybe it will happen. But I do think that this is what's required to get students to fully adopt digital media, because as soon as you put in front of them the potential that it's going to raise their grades, they're going to jump all over it. So this is just a slide documenting my common workflows that I would use. So I'm using ebooks, resource apps, lectures from my university, and all of this goes into Notability, which is my handwriting app that I use. And then this is synced to the cloud as a PDF, where I can then view multiple PDFs using Goodreader. If I choose to annotate any of these Goodreader PDFs, they will then sync again to the cloud, and they're all available on all of my devices. I think the key thing, I don't have time to go over all of the different apps that I use, but I'll see if I can get an extended presentation put up if anybody's interested in learning about the apps that I use. The key thing here, though, is that how all of this information syncs to the cloud and then to all of my devices. So connectivity really is the fulcrum of being a digital student, and at the heart of this connectivity is cloud storage. I suspect that almost all of you are familiar with this, but just in case you're not, it refers to the provision of resources on demand via a network. Using an app like Dropbox, others are available, it allows you to connect to the cloud where you can upload, download, and sync your files across all your devices. And it also has really great benefits with regards to sharing information amongst your colleagues. So let's talk about some of the barriers to being a digital student, from my perspective anyway. The way I look at it is that the challenge for me as a student is to learn the information, and the challenge for yourselves is to improve the pathway by which this information is delivered to me. And so I touched on awareness at the beginning of the presentation, and alluded that it may be a reason why students have not fully adopted digital consumption, especially via tablets. And the two key points that arose from this original discussion were awareness and costs. So it's awareness of what you can actually achieve using a tablet, and this has got implications, I think, with libraries. And if you're a librarian and you're sat there thinking, well, my students, I'm not really clear on what digital consumption, what digital stuff that my students want to use, it's probably because they don't know themselves. So awareness is quite a big problem. And the bottom line regarding awareness is that the students, especially my colleagues, don't really know what workflows are made possible by using a tablet and digital consumption. This is even apparent when you look at the students who do own tablets. I'm yet to see a medical student in my stream using a tablet to its full potential. I think that improvements in digital literacy amongst libraries and librarians would probably help to engage the student population more, and provide them with advice and improve awareness, essentially. You could also consider using student advisors, because there will be students like myself who've been using tablets and digital consumption for a long time, and they know what works and what's good for them, and asking for the help from these students is perfectly acceptable, I think. Publishers could also help by offering free offline ebooks with paper copies. I'm not talking about the online student consult stuff that I'm not particularly thrilled with. And costs, again, a big problem. I mean, upfront costs are never really going to change, and they are always going to make a big hole in your pocket. And there's not a lot you can do to avoid that, other than perhaps loaning tablets and things like this out on libraries. But to be honest, with bring your own device, I think most students, if they know what they can do with a tablet, they will buy one over a laptop in the future anyway. Publishers, they really hold the key to one of the biggest problems that I currently face with costs, and that is the key dichotomy really between private and institutional consumption. I have to rely almost solely on private consumption of information if I wish to remain paperless and not settle for lesser resources, meaning I have to pay for all of it myself, which is pretty costly, and surely not quite right, considering in theory surely my university fees should be paying for the resources that I find most useful, and these are increasingly digital. The cash sinkhole, however, for digital students at the moment, I feel, is not these upfront costs or the costs of the essential apps that you will use on a day-to-day basis, but it's the purchasing of these textbooks and subscription-based apps. So I can get free access to all the popular texts in paper form from my library, so why can't I get them digitally? Something maybe you should think about. Perhaps it's the institutes either not being able to get access, having the actual ability to provide the content to their students. For instance, I doubt that Inkling's textbooks are available to institutions, or they can't afford the subscription costs. Our university has a problem with getting an app called Best Practice at the moment. Quite a lot of us want to get it, but it's too expensive to get on a subscription basis. So, reducing these costs is definitely something that needs to be considered, or at least rearrangement of the subscription bases that libraries use. The other problem I have is fragmentation, and I have to essentially buy my ebooks from multiple different sources and then use multiple different platforms to access the content. And the quality of these platforms can vary tremendously, not to mention the mere fact of having to use numerous different apps to read different publishers' books is a bit of a pain. And the quality of the electronic textbook can vary as well. EPUBs are horrible as textbooks, and I urge you, please don't make them anymore. PDFs are much preferable, but only if they've not got DRM protection on, because otherwise you can't use them with third-party apps. And the reason I like to be able to use them with third-party apps is because usually the app that is required to run the DRM protected PDF is a bit rubbish, and I'm also able to annotate the PDFs if I use them in third-party apps. So my ideal workflow would really focus more on the textbooks and their costs, because the note-taking abilities that I have at the moment far exceed my expectations, and they are excellent. But the textbooks and what's available to me is not that great. So I think interactive textbooks need to be adopted as a standard, and it would be nice to be able to export content from these interactive textbooks in a PDF format so I can use them in my own notes. The whole ebook market, from my perspective, seems to be very fragmented, and something sort of needs to be done about it. Really, it would be preferable to have a future where you're looking at interactive and smart books, but even so, PDFs and, dare I say it, EPUBs need to also be available from just preferably one store, and then be able to be viewed on one platform. That's probably a pipe dream, but I can dream. I think eventually that some correlation of this will come, whether it's by amicable agreement and negotiation or capitalist monopoly. It doesn't really matter to me. And as I've already mentioned, I think that learning analytics integrated into interactive textbooks will ultimately be what bring in the mass population of digital students. But you need to be able to do this whilst reducing costs to your institutions and libraries, or alternatively finding a better payment plan that allows students to rent these high quality digital content, textbooks, whatever, from their university libraries. With this in mind, institutes and libraries need to start thinking about subscription models on a wider sense, so not just to your journals, but also to apps as well. So from my limited perspective, much of what is wrong with the system comes down to the fact that publishers and libraries have to plan well in advance and make changes slowly over time based on evidence. Students, however, can change direction very quickly and easily, and so the problem may just exist because the market has changed so radically, so quickly, that the students have been able to adopt this new technology well before the industry has been able to, and libraries have been able to make changes to support them. Has anyone got any questions? Round of applause.